I was 22 at the time, living in a very small one-bedroom house in the cheapest part of a Welsh town. After work on a Friday night, I hopped online to game with a bunch of my friends. It was the perfect night to stay up late. Heavy rain outside and no work or school the next day. We played for about 2 hours before a sudden sound made me pause everything. It was a thump. Sounded like it came from upstairs. My first thought was a possible leak in the roof from the rain, so I went up to check. The only rooms upstairs were the bedroom and a half bath, and neither showed any signs of leaks. I went back down and rejoined my friends. I stayed online for a while, only logging off around 2 a.m. when everyone else went to bed. I shut everything down and sat on the couch with some snacks, watching YouTube on my phone. 10 minutes in, I heard another thump, again from upstairs. But this time it was so muffled it almost sounded like it came from the roof. I did a more thorough search of both the bedroom and bathroom, but again, nothing. I was sure it wasn't thunder. It vibrated through the walls like something physically hitting the house. After 10 minutes of looking around, I was so determined to figure it out that I put on my shoes and went out into the rain to check from outside. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a tree branch hanging close to the side of the house. It was large and sturdy, but still a good 3 or 4 feet from the siding. Even in the rain, it wasn't swaying much. It seemed unlikely it could reach the house and cause that kind of noise. But as I looked at it, I noticed a small window partially hidden by the tree. It was higher than my bedroom window, which meant it had to belong to an attic. I had no idea the house even had one. The hatch wasn't visible anywhere, and the roof wasn't steep enough to suggest usable space. That hidden window was the first clue. I went back inside, more curious than ever, and started searching for the attic hatch. It took a minute, but I found it inside my bedroom closet. It was small and smooth, blending into the ceiling. Only the faint outline of the panel gave it away. I stood on a box and pulled it down, releasing a rusty ladder. Immediately, a rotten smell hit me, followed by another thump, this time from below. I could tell the attic was extremely short, maybe 2 feet tall at most. I climbed up carefully and looked into the narrow, dark space. It was basically a wide tunnel. At the far end, by the window, I saw a figure crouched on all fours, staring straight at me. I nearly fell off the ladder trying to get down. I grabbed my phone and ran out into the rain, calling 999 from the driveway. The police arrived and detained the man. He was just a homeless person, apparently. He'd climbed the tree to the window and made his way in, staying up there for at least a week without me noticing. The absurdity of it all was almost unbelievable. I moved out shortly after. In every house since, I've always checked the attic. But the one thing that stayed with me is the image of that man on his hands and knees, staring at me with eyes full of both fear and rage. For the past few years, I've been working 2 jobs. I usually leave my house around 6 in the morning and don't get home until 10 at night. Then I sleep, and on most days, I repeat that same schedule. It's not ideal, but it's the situation I've been in for a while. This happened just a couple of months ago. I came home one night and did what I always do, showered and got ready for bed. But while I was in the shower, I heard movement that sounded like it was just outside the bathroom door. I quickly got out and checked. Nothing. I figured it was just the house creaking. I finished up and got into bed. All throughout the night, I kept hearing odd noises from around the house, mostly creaking, like if it were really windy outside and the house was swaying. But there was no wind, no reason for the house to be making any noise. At one point, in the middle of the night, I got up and walked around to try and find the source, but again, nothing.
The next morning I was exhausted. I had to work the whole day, relying on coffee to stay awake. By the time I got home, I was drained. I went straight upstairs and turned the shower on. But before I even got in, I heard something outside the bathroom door again. This time, I was sure it was right outside. It sounded like it passed by and left the bedroom. Unlikely as it seemed, it really sounded like something had moved across the room. I knew I had to check. I felt uneasy, but I finally worked up the courage to look. I didn't see anything. I walked through the house and did a quick check of each room. Still nothing. I convinced myself it had to be something odd going on inside the walls or under the floorboards. I showered and got into bed, falling asleep just before midnight. The instant I woke up, I knew something was wrong. It was very dark, still well into the night, and the house was completely silent. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but I could feel it was connected to the sounds I'd been hearing. I peered over at the door and saw the slightest movement of a shadow under the crack. I jolted upright and stared across the room. My heart started racing as I saw the shadow move away from the door and heard footsteps walking down the upstairs hallway. I was frozen in fear, but adrenaline must have kicked in because I jumped out of bed and swung the door open. At the end of the hallway stood the dark outline of a man. His eyes were the only thing that stood out, piercing through me with anger and restlessness. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it. His footsteps immediately went down the stairs, and I waited another 30 seconds before I heard the front door open and close. I called the police as soon as I could. They arrived quickly, but didn't have much luck. They found a few signs that the man had been in my house for at least a few days, but that was it. I don't know where he was hiding, but I always think back to those moments when I'd hear him walk past the bathroom door. Maybe he was sleeping in my bed, then quickly hiding in the closet when I got in the shower, using that moment to slip out of the room. I also wonder why he spent that extra time downstairs before leaving. He knew I seen him. He had to assume I'd called the police. So why linger? Everything is just speculation now, but knowing that some random man was hiding in my house while I slept is horrifying. As far as I know, he hasn't come back, and there have been no updates on who he was.
Last year, I moved into a new house in Somerset, far from the city. My new job was remote, so I had no reason to stay in a crowded, overpriced area anymore. For the first couple of months, I enjoyed everything about the place, especially being so far from other people. But one regular weekday afternoon, I got a knock at my door. It was the first time anyone had come to my door since I moved in, so it caught me off guard. I walked up and opened the door to a tall, middle-aged man. "How can I help you?" I smiled, trying to be friendly, thinking he was probably a neighbor from down the lane. But strangely, the first thing he did was lean to the side and look past me into the house. It was like he was trying to see who else was home. Weirded out by his behavior, I pulled the door inward and blocked the view with my body. Before I could say anything, the man turned and walked away. I stayed and watched him go all the way down the driveway, continuing until he reached the street, where he got into a parked car and drove off. Without a doubt, that was the strangest encounter I'd ever had with someone up to that point, and I had no idea how to even process it. That night, I stayed home for dinner just to make sure the man didn't come back. I debated calling the police to file a report, but I thought I'd sound ridiculous for doing that just because some man came to my door and did nothing. I turned on the TV and tried to relax before going to sleep. While I was on the couch, though, I heard voices outside. I quickly muted the TV and listened. It was muffled, but I could make out at least two separate people talking somewhere in the backyard. I ran to the back window and opened the blinds. In the distance, I saw two figures walking across my yard.
One of them held a long tool or object, but the other was too hard to see clearly. They walked between the trees until they reached the side of the house. I rushed to the side window and tried to see where they went, but I lost track of them, and they had stopped talking. I checked every window and still couldn't see or hear them anymore. Then, loud knocking at the front door made me jump and sent chills through my body. I walked up, trying not to make any noise, and looked through the peephole. One man stood there, dressed in dark clothing and wearing a hat that covered his eyes. He had to be one of the men I had just seen, but where was the other? "What do you want?" I yelled, figuring they already knew I was home, or maybe I'd scare them off. The man stayed on the doorstep and looked over at the side of the house, then back at the door. After a few seconds, the lack of response started to terrify me. I went back to the living room to get my phone and call the police, but I was interrupted by a loud smashing sound, followed by another and another. I looked across the hall and saw a man hitting a shovel against the back door. He saw me, locked eyes for a second, then ran away. I was so scared I hesitated, unsure whether to call the police or find somewhere to hide. The best answer was obviously to do both, but my thoughts were interrupted again when I heard the side window getting hit. I grabbed my phone and dialed 999 while the man continued to hit the window over and over. But just as the police picked up the call, everything went quiet, and it stayed quiet until they arrived. When they pulled in, I was surprised by a sudden commotion outside. It turned out to be the man at the door who had chosen not to leave. After a closer look, it was the same man who'd come by earlier that day. Strangely, when the police detained him, he refused to say anything about the other man. He denied everything, even though there were clear cracks and dents in the doors and windows. It was frustrating to hear, and even weeks later, the man still refused to explain why he'd come to my house twice that day, or who the other man was. Everything remains unanswered, and it still creeps me out to this day. Why was the man trying so hard to break in? What purpose did the man at my doorstep serve in aiding the break-in? I moved away in the following months, and I've only been hoping that it wasn't me they were after, or still are. I was using Craigslist to sell an office chair I no longer wanted. It wasn't broken or damaged and was barely used, but I just didn't need it anymore. It took a few days, but eventually I got a message from a man who was interested. We had a short phone call, and he seemed like any other nice guy. He was willing to pay my asking price too, so everything seemed perfect. We agreed to meet at a Tesco car park, which I chose to keep things public. Come Friday afternoon, I called the man and let him know I was on my way. Then I drove down to Tesco and got there right on time. He said he drove a gray Honda Civic, which I realized was very generic and basically useless information. He knew which car I drove too, so I was hoping he'd see me and come over. But time ticked away and there was no sign of him. I sent a text, and a few minutes later, I called. But now he wasn't picking up. I stayed in the lot for nearly an hour waiting for him to show up, but as the sun went down, I decided to just go home. For most of the drive, I was just annoyed and upset that I had wasted my time for no reason. But about halfway back, I realized a car had been following me for a while. I got nervous, but once I pulled into my street, it turned away. After going inside and tossing my phone and stuff on the counter, I went back out to bring the chair in. As I walked down the driveway, a car pulled up along the road and parked right in front of my house. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked very similar to the car that had been following me earlier. It was a dark red sedan, at least 15 years old, with rust all around it. I quickly got the chair out of my car and went inside, closing the garage and locking all the doors. I peeked out the windows and watched the car just sit there, still running. I checked my phone to see if the man had responded. He hadn't. That's when it really started to make me nervous. After another minute, I heard a car door open and close. I looked out the window again and saw a figure in dark clothing standing beside the car facing the house like he was inspecting it. Once I saw that, I closed the blinds and dialed 999, explaining to the operator that a creepy man was outside and I thought he'd followed me home. They sent an officer, and I thanked them, then hung up. I pushed the blind up slightly and checked the window one more time. His car was still there, but the man was gone. I could feel my heartbeat getting faster as I went around to each window and looked, but it wasn't until I got to the back door that I saw him again. He was standing inside my fenced backyard, looking up at the house. I didn't know what he was doing, but it was really creeping me out. All I could think was that at any moment, he was going to try to break in. After a second, the man started walking to the side of the house. I went back to the front window to see if he was returning to his car, but he didn't reappear. I went around every window again, trying to find him. A few minutes later, the police showed up. The car was still outside, but the man was nowhere to be found. What's worse is that the car was completely empty, not a single piece of paper or even a fingerprint inside or out. It had apparently been bought from a junkyard years ago, but that was the earliest record they had. The police were just as weirded out as I was, especially since the man disappeared, left his car behind, and made no effort to break in. One thing we can say almost for certain is that it was likely the same man from the listing who had used an untraceable email and account and followed me from the Tesco car park to my house. It's been a couple of months since all this, but I still worry, because why else would he have taken the time to inspect my house on all sides if he wasn't planning to come back any day now to finish whatever it was he came to do?
When I was 21, I made the poor decision to move out of my parents' house before I could afford a place on my own. It was something I'd actually planned for months, searching for cheap apartments, roommates, and anything that could help me move out. For some reason, I just prioritized living on my own over everything else. After months of searching, I found a post on Facebook about a room for rent in my area. It was a 2-bedroom house, and the owner was renting out the 2nd bedroom. I sent him a message and got a reply within minutes. He asked a couple of questions, then sent over a document. It looked like a huge list of rules for moving in. Basic stuff, mostly common sense. After agreeing to all the rules, he let me come over to look at the room that same day. When I got there, I was surprised by how clean and well put together the place was. It looked like a model home, perfectly decorated and furnished. The owner, Gavin, was a little strange though. He was in his late 20s, but his personality and appearance didn't match the house at all. He wore a dirty t-shirt and had a weird way of talking. Still, I was so blinded by the possibility of moving out that I didn't care. A week later, I packed up a rental van with my stuff and drove it down to the house. When I walked inside, I almost thought I'd entered the wrong place. It was completely empty. No decorations or furniture, except for an old couch in the living room. It looked nothing like the house had seen the first time. Gavin was standing there, acting like nothing was different, talking my ear off about how excited he was to have a roommate. I asked about all the furniture and decorations, but he basically ignored the question and went straight to helping me move my stuff in. I was a little weirded out, but I still moved in. Several weeks went by, and to be honest, I rarely saw Gavin. He was always working and didn't get home until late at night. But about a month in, I started noticing that Gavin had stopped coming home most nights. Maybe once a week, I'd hear him get in, hang around downstairs for a while, then leave again, and not show up for another week. Part of me didn't care. I liked having the house to myself. But another part of me was curious. He'd wanted me to move in so badly, and now he was never there. Then one night, weeks since I'd last seen Gavin, I was woken up by him banging on my bedroom door and yelling my name. I jumped up and rushed over. Gavin was standing in the doorway, sweat dripping from his forehead and a look of anger in his eyes.
He said, "Do not leave your room," in a harsh voice. Then grabbed the door and ripped the handle from my hand, slamming it shut. I stood there in shock, listening to him walk downstairs. I opened the door quietly, and after a few seconds, I heard him dragging something heavy across the floor into the garage. I ran downstairs to see what was going on. There was a smear of mud and dirt across the kitchen floor leading up to the garage door. I tried to open it, but it was locked from the inside. I realized it was best to remove myself from this situation. I ran out to my car and drove away while calling the police. When they got to the house, Gavin was already gone, and the smears on the floor had been cleaned up. After a few days of investigating, it turned out Gavin was actually renting the house from someone else. I wasn't even legally allowed to move in. All the documents he'd sent me and had me sign were fake. Gavin likely wasn't his real name either, and as far as I know, he never came back. I don't know for sure what he was up to, but he was so adamant about me staying in my room that night, and with him vanishing afterward, he clearly had something horrible to hide. But what really confuses me is why he wanted me to move into the house and live with him so badly. I can't help but think he had some sort of plan for me, and I barely got out of there without having to find out the hard way. 3 years ago, I moved down a few counties to a new city near Bristol for work. Because of money, I couldn't make the trip to see the place before moving in. But I was only renting, so I figured there wasn't too much risk. It was mid-September when the movers came, loaded everything up, and dropped it off at the house. The landlord was nice enough to let the movers in to unload, since I wasn't actually arriving until the following week. It was a Monday evening when I finally got there and saw the house in person for the first time. It was a mess, boxes everywhere and furniture scattered around, but the house itself was fine. The layout was interesting, very separated. It was a single-story home with the kitchen and living room on one side, and on the other side was a long hallway with all the bedrooms and bathrooms. Since it was already late, I went to the master bedroom and started putting the bed together. Then I shut off all the lights and went to sleep. I didn't have a clock set up yet, so I don't know what time it was, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to an odd sound. I thought it was just the house settling, but I wanted to check in case it was something I needed to tell the landlord about. I got up and walked over to the bedroom door. As I got closer, I realized the sound was coming from somewhere down the hallway. I opened the door, and it stopped almost instantly. The hallway was pitch black, so I flicked on the light. Nothing was there. I slowly walked down and peered into the living room. It looked the same as earlier, but I turned on the lights and looked around just to be sure. On the floor, there were a lot of footprints scattered between the boxes. I figured they were from the movers. With no other signs of anything, I went back to the bedroom. It took a while to fall asleep again because I kept thinking about how the sound stopped the moment I opened the door. I tried to come up with any possible explanation for the house making noises, but nothing made sense. When I finally drifted off, it felt like I'd only been asleep for a minute before I was jolted awake by a sudden thump, followed by footsteps running down the hallway. My eyes shot open, and I looked over at the bedroom door. It was wide open. On the ground were clear footprints coming right up to my bed. I jumped up and hurried to see who was there, but by then they were long gone. All that remained were scuffed prints from someone running away. I grabbed my phone and called the police, locking myself in the bathroom until they arrived. When they did, they oddly found no signs of a break-in aside from the footprints. I convinced myself they must have gained access during the week before I arrived, but something still didn't sit right with me. After unpacking and checking every box, nothing seemed to be missing. It obviously makes me wonder what they were even doing in the house, but the biggest mystery is why they walked right up to my bed and what that thump was before they ran away. The landlord was eager to let me break the contract and move out, as long as I didn't say anything publicly about the break-in. At the time, it sounded like he just didn't want anyone to be scared away from the house and risk losing rental income. But now, I'm not so sure.
This happened a couple of years ago when I was 26. My single mother had just passed away, and being her only child, her house was left to me to either sell or move into. I was living in a really run-down apartment at the time because I couldn't afford much, and after a lot of deliberation, I decided to move into the house. It was already paid off, so I'd be saving a considerable amount of money. My goal was to stay for a few years, get back on my feet, then sell it and buy the house I actually wanted. And once my lease was up, I moved across town to the house. It was part of a community of farmland owners, but in recent years, most of the land had stopped being used and was left as empty fields. That's what happened with my mom's land too, just an old barn-style home in the middle of a huge field, with only a narrow, overgrown path leading to it. During my first week living there, I spent most of my time cleaning and arranging my stuff. One night while I was tidying up, I heard a car approaching the house. I looked out the window and saw an old pickup truck driving down the overgrown path. It was strange. There'd be no reason to drive out here unless you were coming to the house. Just as they reached the end of the path, they slowed to a stop. I could make out a male figure in the driver's seat, but not much else. He sat there for a moment, headlights shining over the field, then did a three-point turn and drove away. I figured he'd typed in the wrong address or something, but it was unsettling to see someone come all the way out here so late at night. A few days passed and I'd finished organizing the house. It was a Sunday night and I was staying up late watching TV and eating a home-cooked meal when I heard a familiar sound in the distance, a car coming toward the house. I looked out the window again and saw the same pickup truck, but this time with its headlights off. That's when I knew it wasn't an accident. I checked my phone. It was late. Why would anyone be coming here now? The truck pulled up to the front of the house and parked. A man got out and walked up to the porch. I waited anxiously, but after a minute there was no knock or doorbell. I cautiously approached the front door and looked through the peephole. He was standing right there, staring at the door. I was terrified. He looked like he was contemplating something. Then he turned around, walked back to his truck, got in, and sped off. I was so creeped out that I called the police and reported it, but there wasn't much they could do. I went to bed that night with a bad feeling. Turns out I was right. I woke up to what I thought was a knock at the door, just a single knock. I got up and looked out the window expecting to see the truck, but there was nothing outside. I quietly left my bedroom to go downstairs and check, but as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw the front door was slightly open. I froze. Moments later, I heard footsteps moving through the hallway below. I quickly hid in the spare bedroom next to me and dialed 999 as the footsteps grew louder and started coming up the stairs. They went straight into the main bedroom, and I could hear them rummaging through things like they were searching for something. I was too scared to speak to the officer on the phone, worried the intruder would hear me, so I just sat there silently. After a few minutes, they went back downstairs and finally exited the house. I started talking to the officer as I ran to the back window, hoping to catch a glimpse before they got away. It was dark, but I could see it was the same man from the porch. He was walking through the backyard toward the field of tall grass, eventually disappearing into it. The police came and tried to find evidence, but my description was all they had. I don't know what that man was looking for, but he seemed to be after something. It makes me think maybe he knew of something my mother had, and after hearing of her passing, he came to steal it. But what really terrified me was realizing he had to know I was home, probably in the bedroom, and still went in to look around. What was he planning on doing if I hadn't hidden? I sold the house a month later. I was too scared of him coming back. Even now, I check every few months to see if there have been any reports of break-ins at that address, but it's been quiet ever since that night.